Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Bandish, founder of The Curious Mindset, a private community for technology leadership teams powered by 64 Tech, an IT solutions provider across hardware, cloud, IT services, data, and AI. While 64 Tech powers us, the heart of this community is people. Together, we're building a world where no technology leader leads alone. We exist to help technology leaders become the best versions of themselves because great leadership is 20% technical and 80% people. The real challenge isn't the technology, it's inspiring teams, creating space for honest dialogue, and leading with clarity in the face of chaos. But here's the truth. In a fast-moving world where most technology leaders are stuck in reactive mode, firefighting issues, buried in strategy decks, and chasing delivery, the space to grow quietly disappears. That's why we built The Curious Mindset, a private, invitation-only community that brings technology leadership teams together and connects them with exceptional minds who share fresh perspectives on leadership. No membership fees, no sales pitches, just a space to learn, connect, and grow through shared curiosity, deeper connection, and honest conversations. Please do follow our 64 Tech LinkedIn page for updates, and if a partnership with 64 Tech could support your tech team, or if you're ready to shake things up with your IT suppliers, please use the link below to book a call in with me. Now, this community started from my own experience. I know what it feels like to lead in isolation, and I didn't want others to go through it alone, hence not doing a podcast. Our guiding belief is simple: together we grow. If you believe in what we're building, please stay connected and share it with others. This community grows through invitation and reputation, and this only works when we build it together. Our community now lives on WhatsApp. This is a place to stay connected and join the conversation. Please follow the link below to be added or contact Bryony directly. Thank you. Now it's my pleasure to hand you over to our resident host, Andy McMenemy, our technology leader co-host, Steve Maxwell, and our very special guest, Phillipa Rodney. Enjoy the session.
Bandish, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your continued support, for the generosity from 64 Tech, and the consistent and continued championing of the fact that no leader leads alone in this world where, lots of curious questions happen all the time around leadership and the latest trends and the latest pressures that we're on. It's really comforting to know that there's always a consistent support in the background. And that's the value that 64 Tech offers The Curious Mindset. So we thank you from the heart for being consistently there for us and supporting everything we do. It's my great pleasure to introduce you shortly to Phillipa Rodney. Phillipa is an award-winning engineering leader and a career coach, and she's recently spoke at Lead Dev. And today she's going to be helping us understand something I know that is really close to all of you at the moment in the current economic climate. And that's how we rebuild trust whilst leading teams through change, through layoffs, and through the immense uncertainty that exists out there in our working worlds, not least with AI and all of the issues that are around that. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you all to Phillipa Rodney. Hi, Phillipa.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Delighted to have you here. And we are all literally on the edge of our seats waiting to hear what you're going to share with us. So talk us through your sharings with us today then on the subject of how do we lead correctly through change, through uncertainty, and through layoffs. And most importantly, as leaders, how do we maintain that trust, Phillipa?
This is such an important topic and something that's really close to me. I've experienced quite a few layoffs in the last few years, and because of that experience, whether it's how I might have been treated or how I didn't receive a lot of support or training to deal with the aftermath, so working with my teams, helping them through the changes, but also trying to understand the changes myself, it became such a really important topic, which is why I spoke at Lead Dev, which is why I'm here today, which is why I really enjoy creating resources that people can use, because it's such a difficult thing to go through. Naturally, you do feel quite alone when it happens as well, and I just don't want people to have to feel that way as long as I can share some of my learnings, share the lessons that I've been through, some of the mistakes I've even made, for example. I think it's going to be really helpful because it's an emotionally challenging situation, and I'll never forget the first time I went through it and I found out that a lot of people across my couple of teams were going to be laid off. I found out with only a few hours to go, and I was an emotional mess, to be honest. I just didn't know what to do next. And time just moves so quickly, and you realize it's all very planned. Everything happens at certain time frames, etc. So if leadership have a playbook, so to speak, to help you manage all of that rushed energy, everything happening so quickly, then you'll be able to show up a lot better for your team because they're so vulnerable, including yourself. So they really need you to step up. So I really hope I can be helpful today, and I have made some resources, and I just want to help people get through this scenario with way more confidence than I did in my first time.
Thank you, Philippa. And I think, you know, based upon the conversation we had before coming on camera, the subject of emotional intelligence is clearly one of the foundation pieces that I guess every leader should understand, shouldn't they?
They should, but I guess it's not super fair to assume everyone does either. So whether those leaders are your peers or if you're managing leaders as well, it's something that you can develop and support those leaders with. So something I like to do is being really open about conversations. So for example, when I did experience my very first scenario, I didn't really know what to do. And so being able to talk to my peer group, the other engineering leaders, to understand, has anyone gone through this before? How did you handle it? Is anything the same or a little bit different? Because how layoffs are planned and how it's made up can be quite similar. And so once you've been through it a couple of times, there are things that you'll be able to adapt to or learn how to handle very quickly, especially when it comes to what do I do in those meetings? Like, how do I answer those questions, or how do I even get some answers as well? And I think being able to talk about that emotional aspect with your colleagues, how are you feeling about this? How might this change things? How do I create the space for the engineers or, QA engineers, whatever, whoever you've got in your team? How do I make that space for them to kind of vent? Can be very tricky, but I do think there's a fine balance where let people rant a little bit. So one of my best pieces of advice is don't leave it too late. Let's say the layoffs are announced at 9 a.m. Make sure you have that meeting like by a middle afternoon, time zones forgiving, of course, but making sure you can get people in a room together and addressing the layoffs, but also giving people that space so it doesn't feel super professional, where you're not saying, this is it, layoffs happened, let's crack on and get back to work. We all know silently that day is a write-off. Basically, no one's getting any work done. You'll see people talking in Slack channels, people probably talking in DMs. Everyone's going to be asking you questions. So by getting everyone together, you're already starting to bring that unity again. Everything feels quite disjointed. So getting everyone in a room, being able to talk about it and just say, I know this has happened. This is what's happening today. And sharing what at the moment you might know too much, but just sharing what you know at that time, and say that you're there for them if they want to have one-to-ones with you or if they want to talk to each other. Make sure you do that. And something I also do is kick off a thread in our team channel so that people can say their goodbyes. As someone who has been kicked out like within half an hour after finding out they've been laid off, it can be quite sad as well to not be able to say goodbye. So that's something I try to prepare, is put details in here, say your thank yous, put your LinkedIn, whatever, just so that there's a little bit more of a process in the first day.
That's a really good point, actually, because I had a very similar experience that I can reflect back on now. And I remember, literally within half an hour being escorted because of the level of sensitivity I was, privileged to, and the systems, etc. It was prudent for them to do that. But I do remember it was being handled incredibly sensitively. And I think one of the things that helped me to maintain resilience, and sure you might help us with this, Philippa, is that the operations director that spoke to me at the time said, Andy, this is nothing personal. This is an absolute commercial decision, and you're just unfortunately a part of that decision, but it's nothing personal. And it took a while for that to sink in, but I took a lot of comfort from that. So when you think about the resilience piece then, Philippa, how do leaders remain resilient when they have to deliver these uncomfortable newses? to people, and how can we help them to be resilient?
So for the first question, the HR meetings are very quick, to be honest. So resilience through that meeting is really just being able to share great feedback about those people that have been affected. It's at that moment, they're probably not even listening to HR. I know I'm not, because it's usually just very formal. Like you say, it's not personal, it's just things that they have to say. But if you do have the option to be there, I think that's something I would also advocate for is always be in that HR meeting, because I didn't even realize that your managers could be in that meeting until I was put there. But when I'd been laid off before, I never had anyone with me. And it made such a huge difference to just be able to be there for those affected and be able to give some feedback and kind of help calm down that moment. And then, secondly, when it comes to communicating and talking with your team, really focusing on the truth, the underlying truth, as far as you know. So, focusing on business goals, strategic direction, making sure that you're not communicating in a way that feels like it's an us and them mentality, because we are all working for the same company, even if it does feel personal because your colleagues have now disappeared or things are changing in your team. Really bringing it back to, I don't know too much about the decisions, but what I know so far is this is the goal that we as a company are working towards. These are things that need to be met, whether it's, business metrics or a certain amount of money that you're working towards, really focusing on that to help people get used to it's not personal. People weren't chosen specifically because of them. The decision was made to move the company in the right direction that the leadership team or the exec team feel at that time. And over time, people start to not get used to it, but realize it's not as personal as they might think initially.
That's a good point. And I suppose when it comes to layoffs, there is that process which is predetermined. We are being part of the process, aren't we? We're invited in as senior leaders as part of the process to make sure that it's handled correctly and that we deliver our part in that. What about when it comes to the position before it's announced and there's this feeling of uncertainty? How can we lead with trust and with integrity when there is a cultural feeling of uncertainty? We're not sure something's going to happen. It may, but that starts the process of anxiety, doesn't it?
It does, especially when you might notice certain changes. For me, from my experience, it might be role descriptions being changed a little bit or different roles you have in your team moving around. And so, in the recent experience I have, my team started to notice, oh, we've seen some roles changing. What does this mean for our team? So, once again, really focusing on the truth, walking away from speculation. People can gossip, people can run with ideas, but really focusing on what you know. And if you don't have those answers, I would definitely ask you to go find them. Have those candid chats with your manager. They might have a little bit more knowledge than you do, or speaking to your peers to kind of understand what's happening. And then just getting your team to really focus on the things that matter. If anything, now is the time where you're going to have to focus on, the career development, the motivation, bringing home why we're working on these projects. Once again, the business goals, so that they're already thinking about driving the business in the right direction, working on their goals, working on their growth plans, for example, giving them less time to gossip or look into the changes and just keeping them on track, keeping them motivated. And once they start to get into that rhythm, the distractions are going to be less likely to affect them. Or once again, not as personal as you might expect because of the gossip and the conversations.
And what's your thoughts on the levels of communication that we should be doing as leaders in those times? Should we be increasing the frequency and the volume of our communications, or what's your experience?
So in that bubble pre-layoff, so to speak, I think you do run the risk of adding to the frenzy and anxiety if you do start to randomly just increase communications, because then people say, okay, so things are actually happening. So I would probably suggest to keep things very normal. But if you know someone does come to you directly and ask questions, do what you think is the right level for your leadership style, to be honest. If it doesn't feel right to lie, for example, do what you need to do. I think there's a balance that you can find, but definitely post layoff, once things have been announced, increase the frequency. Make sure that you're the point here is to bring as much routine as you can to the individuals in your team to give them a bit more of that sense of normality. So for me, what I like to do is increase the frequency of one-to-ones, adding a drop in my calendar so people can just, they did already, to be honest, but they can just come and have a conversation with me as the days go by and more comms or more updates are shared by the exec team, then you'll have more people wanting to speak to you. And also trying to add a couple more checkpoints as a team. And so something that I added was, a classic coffee chat at the start of the week, having more drop-ins so that people could just chat, banning talking about work and really just reconnecting, and then adding like a decompressing debrief at the end of the week. And having those extra bits will be really helpful because the team really needs to get back together, especially if people have left in that team or you get new team members, which is something that I experienced as well. Being able to just add some routines, add those checkpoints, and focus on building relationships and kind of starting again is really helpful.
Yeah, that's I'm mindful that we've got a range of tech leaders across the Curious Mindset at all various levels of seniority. And there's a thought that's playing out in my mind here that some of our leaders will be being affected by this situation, but also some of our more senior leaders are the ones that are going to be infecting people with the situation. They're having to make the call, they're having to make the layoffs. It's their decision, or they're being told, to streamline their division. And that's very challenging when you've brought those people into the business, you've nurtured their careers, and you're then as a senior leader having to make the decision. What advice can you perhaps share with us for that scenario?
So the decision's already been made, and people have already been told. So the best thing you can do is the aftercare aspect. So as we know, it can be really difficult to even be motivated to start looking for jobs post layoff. So something as leaders we can do is trying to make that process a little bit smoother. And so that could be providing references or updating areas on that person's LinkedIn, like the recommendations section, or simply reaching out afterwards. What I have been told and something that I have seen is, initially when someone says, "Hey, I've been laid off," whether it's on LinkedIn or somewhere, they'll get lots of reactions. But the reality is that could be quite a long time for them. It could be 6 months, it could be a year onwards, and the communication does immediately decrease. So being mindful to make a note to check in on that person, a couple of months down the line, just to see how they're going will really go a lot further than you would expect, because most people do just drop off and not reach out to that person again, which just adds to the demotivation and the potential depression that person could be facing. So I would say aftercare is really important for those affected, and then really keeping in touch with your peer group, once again, that leadership team that you might be managing or the people that you're working with. The more that you can openly talk about the layoffs and how it's affecting you or your team, the I don't want to say easier, but the smoother that process can be and the more empathetic you can make that process.
I think that's really important, is at the empathy side of things. But help us to understand something that may be going through, a few people's mind when they're in that situation, is how, what are the key components to, I suppose, maintaining trust and maintaining credibility when you're in that situation of having to pass uncomfortable news and ideally, process people through the layoffs?
Well, so I've covered like the first stage, which is, really focusing on rebuilding those connections, bringing in some calm to the storm, so to speak, and really focusing on rebuilding trust. I think the second piece would be, you know, re-establishing expectations. I feel like in my experience so far, people really focus on delivery. So even when layoffs have happened, stakeholders will just expect your team to continue working at the same velocity that they were pre-layoff, but that's extremely unrealistic. And if there's one thing you can do to really support your team and yourself from burnout, is having conversations with those stakeholders, having a look at your timelines and your roadmaps and seeing what really makes sense right now. For example, when I had an experience where my entire QA department disappeared, that was definitely going to change the output of my team. And so that's something that we really had to band together and talk about, is understanding what's the new strategy, what do we need to do hiring wise or headcount wise, what do we need to do about the shapes of our teams, what features make sense anymore. Something I mentioned is, do we even need this feature anymore? You know, a lot of the legacy knowledge has disappeared because that team had been made redundant. My team didn't have a lot of knowledge or ownership. And so I was like, sometimes just get rid of a feature. If the stats are saying it's not used and it's not popular and we've lost that knowledge, could we just get rid of it? So really talking to those stakeholders and resetting those expectations. But I would also say chasing those answers about what does it mean for your team? What do these changes mean in terms of who's new, who's joining the team? What do we own now? What features want we own, for example? And really understanding what does the future look like for your team. Something I did was hosting workshops. So I did a workshop with my team. We kind of went from scratch because we had some new people joining. So classic introductions, getting to know each other, typical icebreakers, then understanding what are everyone's skills, what are the things that we've done in this company before, the features you've worked on, what knowledge do we have, and also what knowledge have we lost, and being able to just completely redo what the shape of the team looks like. Gave the team more stability, helped them understand, truly understand how the changes affected them and what was next and upcoming. And because I was able to review the roadmap and review capacity plans, I was factoring in that dip in productivity. The onboarding experience for a lot of people, it will be their first time having you as a manager if they've moved teams, or it's going to be their first time working with that group of people if they've moved team as well. So there's going to be a lot of onboarding, so you do need to treat them as if, you know, they're a brand new person joining the team, even if they've come from the same company, and really factoring that in to your delivery roadmap. And so coupling that and doing that will really help reset expectations. It will once again help build that trust because you're showing the team that you're paying attention to the right things. I think people really forget about delivery. And I'm going to say this a lot because I've been burnt and been expected to deliver things immediately despite losing like half of my team. So I definitely would bang on that point. And then the next phase, yeah, links to stabilizing the team environment. So once again, how much normality can you bring to this team? So what I mentioned before about, you know, adding some coffee chats, bringing in the routines that they might be used to. I don't want to say like typical Scrum ceremonies, but for example, if you haven't been doing retrospectives, please bring those in. And bring in some classic routines that people know, like stand-ups and syncs, etc. Whether you want to add some pair programming sessions, some mobbing sessions, or brainstorming sessions, I think all of those. I know engineers can feel a little bit fatigued by those meetings, so don't put too much. But by having that predictability, they know this is going to happen on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Friday. That's really going to calm and regulate their nervous system down a lot more, and they'll be really grateful for that. So, third point would be stabilize the team environment. And then, what is the fourth point? Because I literally make this framework and I always forget. Transforming challenges into opportunities. So, as leaders, we always focus on career growth. And this is a tricky time to get people to, you know, want to do their work, want to work towards the company goals, or even try and grow and focus on that career development plan. So, something I like to say is revisit those career goals that you've gotten written down for everyone. Have a look and see if there were any areas or like niche areas that people wanted to look into. Because of the changes of ownership, there might be an opportunity for someone to step into a new role or step into a new specialism or onboard someone else that can directly move them in the direction that they wanted to, but at a much faster pace just because of the urgency that the layoffs have brought on. And so that's something that worked really well for myself. I had a back-end engineer join my team and they wanted to learn a little bit more of the front-end technologies and work on a specific product. And they'd mentioned that in their first chat with me. So that's something I could do. Then I had someone that wanted to do a lot of mentoring, joining to help pair with them and guide them and have a lot more touch points with them. So really focus on how can you focus on motivation, how can you keep people engaged. You know, people like to think that they're going to grow and develop, and whether it's climbing the ladder or moving horizontally, whatever matters to them, really focus on the people and how you can keep them engaged. And I think that's going to be really beneficial for them as well. So that would be a 4-step process I would suggest.
Thanks for that, Philip. That's really good. One of the questions I'm like to ask you is about your own personal resilience. So, when you found yourself in difficult times or having to lead teams through uncertainty, through change, or through layoffs, what's one of the things that you've practiced as a self-care that helped you to, I suppose, maybe decompress at times or to have that kind of mindset of being resilient enough to get through this, even though perhaps you didn't have all the answers at the time? What sort of things do you advocate for self-care and to help build resilience for those leaders that are having to take their teams through these scenarios?
I would advocate for really being yourself, especially at such a vulnerable time. If you are feeling down, if you're feeling overwhelmed, don't go through that on your own, whether it's talking to your colleagues, or, if you do have a really good relationship with your manager, having those conversations to reassess your workload, reassess the expectations, because I spoke about reassessing expectations for your team, but we really need to practice what we preach. We need to do it for ourselves as well, especially if, you've gained 5 more team members. Okay, how is this going to work? Don't always say yes straight away. Say like yes and start to think about how you can make things better for yourself. I would also say take breaks. Um, Decompress, get some space. There's a lot of people depending on you to make quick decisions, to make the right decisions, and to have a high impact. You can't rush that and you can't pour from an empty cup. And so, definitely give yourself some space. I like to go for walks when I'm being dragged by my dog. I like to, light a candle and have some nice evening routines to decompress, and also just be mindful of your focus time as well. Once again, we're putting in routines and rhythms for the team. You've got a lot to do. So definitely revisit your calendar, have a look at your commitments and change that to make it work from you. Because now is a different time. And so the expectations of you are going to be very different. So you need to change how you might work or what your normal day to day might look like. I can see someone said walking meetings. I admire you, Tristan, because I haven't figured out walking meetings, to be honest. But yeah, anything you can do to spice up your day to day, I would definitely advocate for.
Tristan's walking meetings will probably be 100 miles an hour, but that's another subject.
Okay.
So again, this is a really important part because I think we sometimes lose sight of the fact that in the middle of it all, we still need to be focused and we need to be resilient and we need to have energy, to face these challenging times. And I just wonder if you can share any advice with us on those areas.
So I couldn't hear the last bit. Could you say that again?
Sorry, yes, if you could share some advice with us on how to maintain our energy, how to maintain our focus, which ultimately, I guess, helps us to be resilient. What have you found has worked for you particularly?
I would say it's important to understand how you, for example, take in information, how you respond to things, because if you're just following someone else's templates or someone else's ways of working for yourself, it's just not going to work. So I like to understand, what do I expect of myself? What is the outcome? And then sort of making a routine for myself. When I like to focus, I like to give myself that space. I like to read, I like to listen to podcasts, and I think communities are really important as well, like this one here. Like I said, you cannot work in isolation when it comes to these topics, so you really need to lean on other people.
And I think that's one of the strengths of the community is that I know there are a number of conversations going on where people are sharing, scenarios they're facing and looking for advice and guidance from their peers. And I suppose work in the business as well, it can be peers across different pillars of our business because it's never in isolation, is it?
Yeah, exactly. I think collaboration is just key because you can learn so much from other people. And as I mentioned before, layoffs will keep happening. And, whether you've done it before and it's the next time, they will feel quite different. But being able to learn from each other and just make it better every iteration is just going to be really important for you because they're happening way more often than they used to.
And in your research and your learnings, I know we spoke a little bit beforehand about Harvard Business School being one of the resources that you recommend. Are there
Mm.
any examples of excellence which you kind of keep in the forefront of your mind when you're facing these scenarios?
Ooh. Examples of excellence. That's a tricky one because, shameless plug, I probably try to make them myself. Um, But something that I found really helpful is having that super high level overview of your team and keeping that regularly up to date. When I experienced layoffs the second time, it was much faster for me to be able to have a look at those existing skills, having a look at the future roadmap and updating that, because after the first couple of days, people are going to be coming to you and asking you lots of questions about, okay, you're resetting expectations. You said that we can't deliver this now. What's your plan? And so being able to have that perfect, so to speak, documentation about your team and being able to update it very quickly or even share it has definitely benefited me, especially when I've been collaborating with my other product leaders. I think that's one of the best things I've had. And then secondly, having now created a list of scenarios to expect and actions that you can take, being able to have some sort of checklist to help guide me through the layoff process has been helpful, as well as understanding how do I respond to people's questions, what are the things I can or cannot say, for example. Yeah, I think having a guidebook, having preparation where possible is really helpful.
Thank you. I know there's probably a number of questions coming through on the chat because I can see the numbers scrolling up on the bottom here. So I'm going to invite Steve in because I think Steve has got a great insight into this area of tech leadership. He's one of our prominent tech leaders, and I'm going to invite Steve to come in and start fielding some of those questions because I'm fairly sure some of them will need meaty answers. So Steve, if you'd like to step forward and